Rain stitched the freeway into silver threads, wipers thumping like a slow heartbeat I couldn't sync to. A semi roared past me, its lights exploding the world into white for half a breath, then darkness again. Wet asphalt, cat's eye reflectors, the green signs floating like ghosts in mist. The digital clock on my dash blinked 2:17 as if it could testify later and be believed. I remembered the smell first, hot brake pads and the faint copper tang of adrenaline turning my mouth metallic. Then the sound, tires screeching somewhere behind me, a clatter of something not meant to be free in the back seat, my own breath counting out loud like I was my own metronome. Left lane, then right, then the slam. Impact arrived sideways, glass shattering into snow, a hard twist of the steering wheel biting my palms. The horn jammed into a single cruel note. The world tilted 90 degrees and the roof became the wall. I tasted blood and wintergreen gum and something like pennies. When the car finally stopped moving, I lay crumpled against the belt with my cheek on cold window, rain finding its way through a hole that hadn't been there a minute ago. Sirens started as an idea and grew teeth. A man's voice, low, steady, cut through. "Stay with me, ma'am. You're okay." The beam of a flashlight found my eyes and turned everything into a tunnel. He smelled like wet nylon and coffee. He asked my name. My mouth dried 3 times before it gave him Maya. He asked the date. I made one up and he didn't correct me. He asked who was in the car. My throat closed before I could answer because a sound came from the back seat. Soft, high, and wrong, like a swallowed cry. "Do not move," he said, firmer now. He reached for the back door. Someone else shouted for a crowbar. My fingers found the buckle and failed it. Blood ran warmed on my wrist, sticky in the cold air. The horn died. A distant train sang a long, lonely note as if mocking ours. The flashlight dipped for the briefest second, and I saw it. A red scarf tangled around something in the back, limp and soaked. The world spun too fast to focus, but the color burned its shape into me. A loop, a knot, a child's size. Then the flashlight lifted, and a paramedic's face, kind eyes behind fogged glasses, filled my sky. "Maya, can you hear me?" I nodded because words were a cliff I couldn't climb. He asked another question. Something inside me folded into a small animal. When they cut me free, the seatbelt snapped with the sound like a lie tearing. The last thing I remember is my own voice, small and certain in the wreckage. I didn't do it. But what was the it everyone would soon decide I owned? And why did the red scarf feel like a memory I hadn't earned yet?
My name is Maya Alden, 31. I'm a photo retoucher for a company that sells the idea of light to people who live in rain. Catalogs, campaigns, faces with their shadows laundered. My days smell like warm electronics and coffee grounds. My nights like damp sweaters and takeout. I lived alone in a 1-bedroom over a bakery on 24th, the kind of place where morning meant yeast and laughter and someone shouting in Norwegian at a mixer. Routine is a religion in Seattle. Same bus, same coffee, same "how about that weather?" I liked it. Or I told myself I did. The one unquiet part of my life was Eli, 35, art director, the kind of man who could name 12 shades of gray without blinking. We were new in a way that was already old. 3 months in, toothbrush left on purpose, key borrowed and then forgotten in a pocket. He had a daughter, June, 7, with a laugh like wind chimes and a talent for leaving her socks in improbable places. He had a co-parent too, Sophie, who could dismantle a room with a sentence and probably build it better afterward. We were all careful, which is another way to say no one was honest yet. I met June on a Sunday at the Fremont Sunday Market, where she insisted the kettle corn lady was a witch, and that was good because witches always know the shortest way home. June wore a red scarf that day, knit by Sophie's mother, Eli told me later, a little proud, a little sad. June's hair smelled like strawberries and rain. She held my hand on the Burt Gilman Trail and asked, "Are you allergic to rabbits?" like an interview question. I said no, and she nodded like she'd expected me to fail something. Work was work. Faces, pixels, the art of pretending nothing was ever raw. I spent hours making skin look like porcelain without apology. I could erase a vein, a bruise, a story. Then I'd ride the bus home, my fingers still dancing shortcuts in the air, and I'd pass the little square by the canal where teenagers kissed under black umbrellas and old men fed pigeons like they were bribing them to stay alive. I loved the city in the rain because it made everyone honest. Or at least blurry in the same way. My mother called Thursdays. She lives in Spokane, keeps a house that smells like lemon oil and the ghosts of arguments we've retired. She thinks my job is on the computer, which is true in the way a storm is wet. She worries about my heart and my brakes with equal fervor. I told her about Eli, in pieces, like feeding a shy cat. I didn't tell her about Sophie because the word X does strange things to a mother's imagination. At the office, my boss Kellen used to say, "We sell the memory, not the moment." I told him he sounded like a thief. He laughed and said, "That's still a sale." I filed his words under beware and kept erasing shadows for a living. The first time I saw the black SUV that would matter later, it idled across from the bakery with its wipers slow and patient. The driver wore a baseball cap and didn't look up when I looked back. Maybe I noticed because I'd watched too many true crime shows while flattening flyaways from models' hair. Maybe I noticed because the SUV kept showing up for a week. The same street, the same angle, rain making it into a rumor. I told Eli and he said, "It's Seattle. Half the cars are black." He kissed my forehead and changed the subject to ramen. 2 weeks before the crash, a letter appeared in my mailbox. No return address. My name printed in careful block letters that tried too hard to be friendly. Inside, a single photograph, glossy, 4x6, taken from a distance. Me and June on a park bench in Gasworks, sharing a pretzel, her red scarf a bright wound across the gray day. On the back, in the same neat hand, "Be careful who you remember." I showed Eli. He went very still and said, "Somebody's being a creep." And then we both ritualized a shrug. I put the photo in my drawer with the pay stubs and the keys that don't open anything anymore. The city slid toward winter. The dark arrived at 4 and stayed like a bad house guest. I bought a lamp that promised daylight and learned its lie. June turned 7.5 and demanded half a cake. I made one that leaned to left like a tired house, and we laughed and ate it anyway. I didn't know then that memory is a room with mirrors. You think you're looking out. You're not. If I could go back and touch one hinge, would the door swing differently? Or was it always meant to close where it did?
We left Eli's place late because June needed one more story, and then another, and because the rain did that sideways thing that makes adults polite to their own fear. Sophie had texted she was running behind at the hospital. She's a physician assistant. I always heard the physician louder than the assistant. And could I drop June at Sophie's on my way home? Of course, I said, because I wanted to be the kind of person who could be trusted with someone else's heart, when that heart wore glitter sneakers. June climbed into the back seat with her red scarf and her backpack with the rabbit ears. "I'm a burrito," she announced, wrapping the scarf around her face till only eyes. I buckled her in and told her burritos don't talk. She talked anyway. The car smelled like wet wool and the cinnamon gum I use when I lie to myself about smoking. We took 15th to Market, then toward the freeway. The wipers worked hard enough to sound tired. June sang under her breath about a teacher who turned into a cat. At the ramp, the black SUV slipped in behind us, like it had been waiting in the dark for the cue. Headlights sat a little too close in my mirror. I told myself Seattle drivers aren't unkind, just resigned, and merged into the middle lane. June fell asleep somewhere around Northgate, her mouth slightly open, the scarf slipping to her lap. I thought about how small a person can look when the world is large and fast and mean. I thought about how love makes the math of risk different. I checked my mirror again. The SUV stayed where it was. Not beside me, not ahead, just a certainty in the periphery. I pressed KEXP, and the radio gave me a song that sounded like a storm remembering it used to be a sky. The clock said 2:13 when everything went wrong. It was small at first, a wobble, a stutter in the wheel like the road had a shiver I could feel. Then a bang, sharp, metallic, behind me, and the car yawed left as if insulted. I corrected, and the correction overruled me. Tires screamed. June made a sound like a swallowed cough, and I said her name once, twice, too late. The SUV surged in my mirror, a dark shape with a flash of something. Was it a license plate frame, a sticker? And then brake lights bloomed, and the world narrowed to an argument between physics and luck. Impact is not one sound. It is a chord. Metal against metal, glass against everything, my shoulder against the seatbelt, the car trying to argue with friction and losing. We spun. The horn stuck. A streetlight smeared the world into white, and then the ditch took us. And then the voices, and the red scarf, and my slow, clumsy hands. When the paramedic put my belt and pulled me into the wet night, I saw the black SUV at the edge of the shoulder, hazard lights blinking polite orange. A shadow moved inside, then disappeared. A door never opened. When the ambulance doors closed on me and the world became heat and siren and the vinegar tang of antiseptic, I tried to say June and made a sound that broke me. At Harborview, the lights were too bright and the questions were too many, and the space inside me was too small to hold anymore. A woman in navy scrubs asked if I had allergies, and when my last tetanus was, and if I had taken anything tonight. Her pen didn't flinch. They took my rings, they wiped my hands, and later I would learn they were collecting my prints like I was a story that needed a villain. Sophie arrived with rain in her hair and fire in her eyes. She smelled like winter air and the hospital cafeteria. "Where is she?" she asked before she saw me. Then she saw me. The rage flickered, rearranged itself. What happened? I told her what I knew, which was almost nothing and felt like less. Eli arrived breathless 5 minutes later, his face a collapse. He reached for me, and then for Sophie, and then for the space between us where the red scarf should have been. "Where is June?" he asked, and I couldn't answer because a detective stepped forward and said my name like it was a warning. "Miss Alden, I need your consent to a blood draw and a statement." Sophie's voice went thin. "Now? Are you—" "It's standard. Accidents at this hour often aren't." He smelled like wet wool and not enough sleep. I gave him my arm. I gave him my story, such as it was. He wrote the words down like they were obedient. An hour later, I learned 2 things. June was no longer in the car when responders tore the back door open, and my blood showed no alcohol, no benzos, no opiates. Klein's face didn't change it either. He was built for nights where 2 truths don't cancel out a lie. "Miss Alden," he said softly, "can you think of anyone who'd want to harm you or the child?" The question landed like a key in the wrong lock. Someone had sent me a photo. Someone had watched the bakery. The black SUV. My mouth found a name I hadn't thought to be afraid of yet. My father. But if he was the threat I'd been trained to anticipate, why did the red scarf feel like a promise I'd broken myself?
They let me out after imaging and IV fluids and a lecture about concussions that sounded like a recipe recited by someone who'd never cooked. The hospital smelled like bleach and warm plastic. My shoulder burned where the belt had held me in the wrong world. Eli took me home in a rideshare because his hands shook too hard to drive. Sophie didn't ride with us. She went to the precinct to give her own statement, each footstep a verdict I couldn't argue. In my apartment, the bakery's noon batch scented the air like a lie about comfort. I lay on the couch while rain painted Morse code on the windows. Eli paced. He touched everything, books, mugs, the edge of the rug, as if checking their loyalty. "She's smart," he said for the 6th time. "She'd hide. She knows how to wait." The words trembled. I taught her to wait.
I closed my eyes because the room spun clockwise. Behind my eyelids, the red scarf moved like a signal. I saw a small hand, a door half open, rain on glass. I saw the black SUV a car length back, then closer, then gone. The memories flickered like film spliced wrong. Detective Klein called at 112. "We recovered a tire iron from the shoulder half a mile north," he said without hello. "There's paint transfer matching your car. No prints. Whoever dropped it wore gloves." "A tire iron?" I said, my mouth filling with the taste of pennies again. "So it wasn't my brakes?" "Your rear line was cut," he said, cleanly, not a jagged break. "And your back door's child lock was off." I sat up too fast and the room lurched. Eli steadied me with a hand, as if I were a lamp tilted by a cat. "Detective," I said carefully, "June wasn't in the car when they got to us. That means she either crawled out and wandered, or someone opened the door and took her." He placed the second option like a glove on a table. "We're canvassing. We're pulling WSDRT footage. We need you to rest and stay reachable." After he hung up, Eli stared at me so long I had to look away. "Who would take her?" he asked, finally, asking me and not the room. I could feel his answer forming. I said mine first, to beat it there. "My father," I said again, "or someone he sent." He frowned. "I've never even met your father." "Exactly," I said. "He's good at leaving until he isn't." When I was 9, Alan Alden took me to Carkeek Park and taught me how to find north using the moss on a tree. When I was 12, he disappeared for 6 months and returned with a new watch and a story about Alaska that didn't have the right verbs. When I was 16, he told my mother he believed in opportunities and followed a man to a city where opportunities have teeth. He came back again when I was 23 with a smile that fit too easily and asked if I could help him temporarily by moving money the bank was being slow about. I learned the sound of a con then. It tastes like love at first, then like a debt you sign with your heart. He'd sent one postcard last year from Tacoma with a picture of a paper museum and 3 words on the back. "Proud of you." I threw it away, because pride from a ghost is a haunted house. 2 months ago, I saw him across the street from the bakery in a rain jacket too new for a man who lived in motels. He lifted a hand without waving. I didn't cross, he didn't either. Some people parent by gravity. He parented by eclipse. I told Eli all of this while the room breathed bread. He listened the way people listen when they realize they're not the center of your worst story. He didn't ask if I'd called my father. He asked why I hadn't. Because he answers questions like it's a performance. Because if I call, he'll know he matters. My phone lit with a number I didn't know. Before I could decide, a voicemail took it. A minute later, a text arrived. "Check your email. -A." The email had one attachment. A dash cam still from the freeway shoulder, timestamp 2:19, rain turning the world to watercolor. In the image, a shape bent into my back door, small, a woman's silhouette, the red scarf a band in her hands. Underneath, 2 words, "You left." I forwarded it to Klein with my pulse in my throat. Eli touched the screen like it could confess. "Sophie?" he whispered, ugly and human and wrong. "No," I said colder than the room. "Sophie was at the hospital. She sent a photo at 2:05 in scrubs with a time card. She wouldn't lie about a time card." "Then who?" he asked. I stared at the red scarf till it was all I could see. My mind offered me a quiet, treacherous thought. What if it was me? What if I unbuckled June in shock, pulled her out, and then forgot the one thing memory should have nailed to the floor? Concussions steal minutes. Trauma steals miles. What kind of monster is made of missing film? I threw up in the sink. Cinnamon gum and stomach acid and grief. Eli held my hair like a man cataloging the ways he couldn't help. When Klein arrived at 3:30 with a printout of the still and an apology he wore like a scarf, he set a small recorder on my table. "Tell me about your father," he said, "from the beginning." I told him the parts that hurt less first, as if warming the blade. I told him about the Tacoma postcard, about the man who liked to hover in parking lots, about the way my mother's voice went tight when she said, "Alan," like she had to floss it afterwards. Klein nodded like a metronome, steady, patient. When I finished, he asked the question my mother would have asked if she were braver. "Do you think he could hurt a child?" I said yes, without having to find the courage, because cowardice about the truth had cost me enough already. He pressed stop. The little red light went out. He said, "If he contacts you again, stall. Screenshot. Breathe. Call me." After he left, I lay on the couch and watched the ceiling find patterns in the cheap paint. Behind my eyelids, the red scarf became a road. I tried to follow it. It led me to a motel carpet the color of mold, a coffee cup with a chip, a TV tuned to an infomercial about knives. It led me to my father sitting on a bed like a man who'd lost his map, saying, "You remember wrong, kiddo." I opened my eyes and said to the empty room, "No, I remembered exactly the way you taught me." But if I was right about him, why did the note say you left, like the crime belonged to me?
Detective Klein had the kind of interview room you see in shows and think you'll be braver in. Off-white walls, a table that pretends not to be bolted down, 2 chairs and a camera in the corner, blinking a lazy red. The room smelled like old coffee and older truths. "We got freeway footage," he said without ceremony. "WSDOT cam south of the crash. The black SUV you mentioned exists. We pulled the plate. It's registered to a rental, paid in cash." "Can you poll the renter?" "We did," he said. "We also got a ping from a toll reader northbound with the same plate 1 hour before your crash. That's odd, since your crash was southbound." "So there were 2?" I asked. "So someone switched plates or drove a loop to plant a story," he said. "But that's not the twist." He slid a manila folder across to me. Inside, blown-up stills from a gas station on Aurora, the SUV, the rain's chalky script, a woman in a hood standing by the rear passenger door, her hands busy with something at the latch. The hood blew back in the wind for one frame, and the face was there. Soft jaw, high cheeks, mouth set like a decision. I recognized her from the mirror. It was me. My head went silent, the way a room does when the music stops and everyone pretends they weren't dancing. I stared at my own face doing something I could not place on my timeline. The timestamp said 1:54 a.m. The location said 7 miles from where I remembered myself. My shoulder ached in exactly the place a seatbelt would lay. My palms went hot as if they were wearing someone else's work. I started and the sentence died. Klein watched me, not cruel. He said, "You had a mild traumatic brain injury. Your hippocampus wasn't taking notes. It's possible you pulled off for gas, checked the latch, and forgot. It's possible you unbuckled the child to fix a twisted strap, and then..." He didn't finish because my face did something. "It's also possible someone wearing your jacket and your face used the camera like a weapon." "My face?" I said. The word small and stupid. "Deepfake is a thing, but this looks analog, close angle, grainy. Hoodie could be anyone. Still." He tapped the frame with one knuckle. "You see what I see." "I see a story someone wants me to repeat. I see a frame." He nodded once, like a teacher who wants you to do the math without giving you the answer. "Who benefits from you doubting yourself?" "My father," I said. And Sophie," I said, the name a razor I didn't want to hold. "If she thought I was a danger." "And?" he said again. I closed my eyes and let the worst thought in. "And Eli," I whispered, "if he believed Sophie over me, if he wanted June to live in one house again." He didn't write those down because they weren't facts. He slid another photo forward. My mailbox, the X4x6 from Gasworks, the neat block letters, "Be careful who you remember." He pulled a second envelope from the folder. Arrived that afternoon at the precinct, no return. Inside, another photo from that same Gasworks day. June mid-laugh, scarf, a flag. On the back, "Memory is a choice." "That handwriting," I said, throat dry. "It looks like my father's. He prints when he doesn't want to be himself." "We're working on a sample. Your mother found old notes." I pressed my palms to the cool table to keep from floating. "Detective," I said, "there's something else." He waited.
I used to help my father with photos, I said, shame like a taste. He asked me to clean up documents, IDs, make them presentable. I told myself I was fixing dust. I was 23. I was stupid. If he's learned anything since then, I didn't finish. Klein drew in a slow breath. If he's staging a narrative with prints and plates and mail, then he's not a man in a motel. He's a man with a plan. He slid the last item from the folder, a red scarf, evidence-bagged, wet stain dried into a darker story, found at a bus stop 3 miles from the crash. Someone wanted us to see this, he said. I reached for the bag and stopped myself. The scarf made my fingers tingle. In my head, June's laugh rang like a bell at the wrong hour. I said, she hates buses. She calls them dragon mouths. Maybe someone taught her to be brave, he said gently. He let me go, and the night ate me on the way home. The bakery had closed. The street smelled like rain, deciding to be snow. I lay on my bed with my clothes still damp and my head full of a version of me that did things I didn't remember. Sleep came like a thief and left fingerprints in the morning. If a stranger can dress like you, walk like you, bend their head like you, how long before you start to believe you're the stranger?
Klein called with a location stamped to his voice. Ravenna, a motel painted the color of old teeth. Anonymous tip, he said. Room 15, registered to an Alden. He didn't say which. He didn't have to. I told him I'd meet him there, and then I didn't. I went first. It's not heroic to lie to a detective. It's only human and dumb. The motel lot smelled like cigarettes and bleach. I wore a hood and borrowed courage. The neon vacancy sign stuttered like a stressed heart. Room 15's door had a habit of surrender. I pressed my ear to it and heard a television whisper and a faucet speaking in drips. I knocked anyway because some habits are stronger than fear. Alan opened the door with a smile so practiced it should have had a union card. He wore my father's face the way you wear an old coat, shabby in the seams, reliable in the cold. "Kiddo," he said, expanding his arms like I was the one who needed to be forgiven. He smelled like motel soap and coffee burned to penance. "You look good." "I look like a car accident," I said, stepping past him. He closed the door by the handle twist. He has always hated slams. The motel room looked like a habit. Bedspread that lies about cleanliness, curtains that don't quite meet, a table with 2 chairs that dare to wobble. On the table, a map of Seattle with X's where you don't want to see them. My block, Eli's, Sophie's hospital, the freeway's shoulder. Next to the map, a stack of glossy 4x6s and a roll of tape. "You took the photos?" I said, not asking. "Collected," he said grantly. "I collected them." "For who?" I asked. "For us," he said, the word a trick coin. People underestimate how fragile memory is. They trust the camera more than their own head. That's a flaw I've learned to monetize. "Where is she?" I said. The room, the map, the man gone, leaving only the question. He didn't blink. He never does when the lie is big. "Safe," he said. "With you?" "With someone safer," he said. "Someone who knows you leave?" The sentence landed like a slap I refused to register. "You don't get to tell that story. Leaving is your brand." He smiled, pleased I'd used the language he taught me. "We're the same," he said kindly. "You just feel worse about it." A knock on the door interrupted the sermon. Klein's voice through thin wood, "Seattle PD." Alan's smile didn't change. He spread his hands. "You invited them, kiddo?" "Yes," I said, and it felt like breathing. He let Klein in with the grace of a man who thinks the table is still his. Klein's partner, Detective May Allen, ironically the same last name as in a different story of mine, took the corner in watchful silence. Klein's eyes were full of the room before he spoke. "Mr. Alden," he said, "we have some questions." Allen gestured to the chairs like a host. He talked about concern and family and coincidences with a cadence that convinced worse people than me. He presented the map like a civic project.
He named the photos documentation. He produced a receipt for a rental that wasn't the SUV we had plate for. He unfolded a story where he was the only adult in a world of children. While he talked, I walked. The bathroom door was open just enough to see a children's toothbrush on the sink, pink, a rabbit on the handle, wet, fresh. My chest forgot its job for a second. "She's here," I said. Alan was already moving, a quiet blade. She shouldered the bathroom door, and the tub curtain didn't hide a person. The toothbrush glowed like proof without context. The sound came from the closet instead. A small intake of breath, a hand on wood. Alan opened it fast. A shape unfolded from the dark and skittered back. A woman, thin, eyes too wide. Not June. My mother. "Mom!" I said, the word losing its meaning halfway across the room. She looked at me like she'd been holding her expression in a jar and it had just been opened. "Maya," she breathed. "I told him no. I told him—" She head shook hard. "He said it was to keep you safe. He always says that." Klein was already reading rights. Alan arranged his shock neatly. "Eleanor was afraid. She wanted to be close. She's not well." "I am not your alibi," my mother said, voice finding bone. Alan's radio crackled. "Unit outside has spotted a black SUV pulling into the adjacent lot and then aborting when it saw patrol. Plate partially obscured. The room leaned toward a new door." "Who else is helping you?" Klein asked. "Who isn't?" Alan said, smiling like a man who thinks he just invented irony. He went quietly. Cuffs, plastic, his posture resigned and righteous. My mother stood in the middle of the room as if the floor might be a trap. "Where is she?" she asked me, guilt-ripped raw. "Where is June?" "We're gonna find out," Klein said, voice the closest to gentle I'd heard it. He handed my mother off to a uniform with a kindness made of practice. After they cleared the room, Alan pointed to the map's lower edge. A number there, small, next to an X by the river. Harlow Storage. A cube of climate-controlled lockers that look like a place you put feelings you can't afford to keep. "Let's go," she said. On the way downtown, the city felt like a machine that's learned to purr when it lies. The rain eased. I tasted metal again. The red scarf ghosted my peripheral. At Harlow, the night manager blinked at our badges like he'd been expecting different faces. Klein's voice went polite and hard and fast. We rode an elevator that smelled like fate lemon and forgotten trauma. The hallway felt refrigerated. Ellen's boots made the only honest sound. The unit number from the map belonged to a locker with a padlock too new. Klein cut it with a bite of metal. The door rolled with a rattle that lived in my teeth. Inside, a folding chair, a thermos, a crate with coloring books, and a sleeping bag in the corner. It moved. "June," I said before I saw her, because names bring people back. She blinked up at us, hair static wild, cheeks red from nap and fear. The red scarf lay in her lap like a flag put down. She saw me and then saw Klein and then saw Alan and made the kind of sound that undoes ribs. "I knew you'd come," she said, and didn't specify who you was because she's kind. I knelt, and the concrete bit through my jeans, and I didn't care. She smelled like crown and plastic and the ghost of shampoo. "Did you leave the car?" I asked softly. She nodded, solemn. "She said a lady helped me," she said. "What lady?" She looked at Alan, and then at me, and then at the scarf. "She said she wanted to fix things. She said grown-ups make mistakes and I could help. She said you were scared and I should hide." "Did she have a name?" Alan asked. She thought very hard. "She said she was Auntie M," she said, proud she remembered. Alan and Klein looked at each other in the way cops do when a thread is pulled free. A-M-E-M-M. A not name that sounded like a person. I wrapped the scarf around Yuna's shoulders, and it felt like a small, stubborn victory. On the way out, the night smelled like a new storm thinking about itself. Klein walked us to the car and said to Alan under his breath, "M could be Emmeline or Emily or M initial or she doesn't exist. A ghost to fit the mouth of a child." "I exist," June announced from the backseat, fierce, "and I'm hungry." "Excellent," I said, my voice breaking on a laugh that felt like permission. "Me too." We had June, and a father in cuffs, and a ghost named M. But who cut the brakes? Who switched the plates? And who wrote, "Be careful who you remember," like a spell? June slept on my couch like a question mark turned sweet. The morning light made the bakery across the street look like a photo I could color correct into joy. Eli sat in the armchair like a man forgiven and not sure why. Sophie arrived with hair pulled back so hard it made a statement. Apology in one hand and bagels in the other. She smelled like scrub soap and the outside of rain. "I'm sorry," she said without preamble, "for thinking—" She swallowed. "For thinking everything bad first." "You're her mother," I said. "Your job is to make sure the worst doesn't win." "We need to talk about custody," she said, because Sophie's brain is a filing cabinet even when her heart is raw. "And lawyers, and what you can't be part of now." I nodded because she wasn't wrong. "I'll do whatever keeps her safe." June sat up then and asked, practical as hunger, "Do bagels come in halves?" We fed her and watched her regard us with a scientist's calm. After she was occupied with cream cheese and cartoons, Eli turned to me and asked, "What now?" Now was a choice I could finally name. Protect my memory by stepping back and letting the system grind, wait for lab results, for Alan to barter information for leniency, for the mysterious M to evaporate into a case note, or risk it by hunting the story myself and stepping into rooms that don't forgive curious women. I looked at June's face, a map of all the routes we were choosing for her without asking. "We go find M," I said, "before she finds us again." Sophie's jaw set. "With police." "With police," I agreed. "And with me." Klein's call came as if summoned. "Good news," he said. "We got DNA on the tire iron, partial, not your father's. Bad news, it's a female profile. And we matched handwriting from the back of your photos to a hospital intake form from 12 years ago. Same hand. Name on the form? Emmeline K." "Emmeline," I said. The word opening a door inside me I didn't know was there. Klein's voice softened in a way that made my stomach turn. "Maya," he said carefully, "Emmeline K., she's your half-sister. Your father signed her birth certificate. Mother was a patient then. The address at the time, Tacoma." The room tilted and took my ribs with it. My mother was suddenly very small on my couch, June's hand on her knee like a blessing neither of them knew they were sharing. Eli's face arranged itself around an apology I didn't need. Sophie's eyes found mine and held. "Send me the file," I said, because I couldn't trust my voice with anything warm. Klein did. Emmeline's face stared up from my phone. 26 now, 19 in the photo. Cheekbones like mine, the Alden mouth we all pretend isn't an echo of a man. The note said, "Admitted with anxiety adjustment disorder. No harm to self or others." I read the lines that weren't there. A girl who needed a father who used her as a plan. I looked at June, then at Sophie, then at Eli. I said, "We go." "Where?" Eli asked. "Tacoma. To the only person in this story who wrote me a letter before everything else did. And if Emmeline had been protecting me in her broken way, what debt did I owe to the girl who learned memory from the same teacher?"
Tacoma smelled like wet rail and coffee and a promise you made to yourself to leave and didn't. Klein sent a unit with us because I pretended I might say no if he didn't. We drove past the paper museum from the postcard I had thrown away because pride isn't proof. The address on the intake form was a group home with a porch that needed paint and flowers that didn't care. A woman with a clipboard met us with that hardened kindness people earned. "Emmeline," she said. "She comes by sometimes, leaves drawings in the mailbox. She likes red." Red. Scarf. Thread. We followed it to a community center where a volunteer said, "She sits in the back and listens to meetings she doesn't join." We found her in a bus shelter, hood up, hands folded, staring at rain making lace and plexiglass. "Emmeline," I asked,
Because names are bridges. She looked up, and her face broke me in a new place. The mirror does that when it's moved into the world. She took us all in, me, the detectives, the rain, and smiled in a way that held apology and triumph in the same breath. "You came," she said. "I got your letters," I said. "You remembered," she said. "Not soon enough," I said. She shrugged. Memory is flexible. Klein moved gently. "Emmeline, we need to ask you about a black SUV, about a freeway, about a child." Emmeline's eyes flicked to me and back. "I didn't touch brakes. I'm not a mechanic." "Did you take June from the car?" Alan asked, steady. "I took her out because cars burn, because doors stick, because the last time I watched a car with someone I loved in it, he didn't get out." "Who?" I asked, the question older than me. She looked at me with pity I hadn't earned. "Our father." She told the story like a person reporting weather. Alan running a job that wasn't called a job, a panicked exit, a car into a ditch, her hands too small when she was 7 and he told her to run. She learned leaving as survival. She learned the weight of doors. "I followed you because Dad asked me to," she said, eyes on her hands. "He said you forget. He said to help you remember to be careful. He sent me pictures to send you, like postcards from a warning. At the crash, I saw the door and the smoke and the red. I took the girl out and told her to hide because you were bleeding. Then the sirens came and I got scared." "Where did you take her?" Alan asked, calm like a rock in the river. "Storage. Our place. Where Dad keeps the things he calls just in case. He said to wait there if anything bad happened. He always says to wait." "Did you cut the brakes?" Alan asked. She shook her head, sharp. "No, I'm not that kind of broken." "Who is?" I asked. She looked at me like I was failing a test neither of us had studied for. "You know," she said. "You work with her." The name formed before I could block it. Sophie. The ex, the PA, the mother who had reasons too neat. "No," I said. It came out too fast to convince anyone. "Not her hands," Emmeline said, almost kind. "Her orders." The second twist didn't arrive as a siren. It arrived as a text on Alan's phone. Lab match on the handwriting from the back of the photos. Not Alan's, not Emmeline's. A close cousin. Sophie's mother, the knitter of the red scarf, the woman who watched me hold June and smiled like a judgment. We drove to her house, and the air smelled like rain trying to be snow again. Marjorie, silver hair, tidy cardigan, the mouth of a woman who doesn't say X because it's messy. She let us in like we were missionaries, and she was bored enough to be polite. Alan walked the rooms like a violin. She found the rubber stamps and ink and a stack of glossy paper. She found a printer with a queue of faces that weren't family. She found a box of scarves, red, wool, hand-knit, tags pinned with names. She found a toolbox that should have held hammers and held instead license plate frames and a plate cover that could slide over numbers. Marjorie didn't deny. She didn't confess. She simply looked at Sophie and then at me and said, "Mothers protect. That's the job. You think you were chosen? You were introduced. She would have forgiven you for being ordinary. She would not forgive you for being dangerous." "I'm not dangerous," I said, and tasted the metal again. "You leave," she said, and the sentence hit me in the place where old stories live. "I taught Sophie to smell that kind." Alan read rights in a voice that could cut bread. Marjorie asked for tea like a person who thinks politeness will commute the sentence. Sophie sat on the couch and folded in half. Eli took June's scarf from my hands and held it like a white flag, dyed wrong. Emmeline stood in the doorway and watched like a person reading a book she already knew the ending to but hoped would surprise her anyway.
We had a method, a motive, a matriarch, yet the freeway still held a ghost, and my father's map had more X's than we'd walked.
Klein wanted a clean end. That's not how stories work. Alan made bail because money is a language he still speaks. He called me from a number I had not blocked and said, "Meet me," and sent a pin to the overpass where my car had learned gravity. He added, "Come alone." I did not. Alan and Klein came as shadows. The air smelled like wet iron and diesel. The freeway sang its long, mean song below. Alan stood at the rail with a bag in his hand like a cliché that didn't know it was tired. He looked smaller under streetlight math. "I never wanted to hurt the kid," he said without greeting. "I wanted you to know how fast a door becomes a wall." "You taught me that when I was 9, I said. "We didn't need the sequel." He sighed, the sound of a man auditioning for sympathy. "Emmeline did good," he said. "She watches, she remembers." "She learned from you," I said. "So did I. The difference is I stopped." He lifted the bag. The red scarf fell out like a tongue. "I could make this worse," he said. Klein stepped from the shadow with the quiet of a verdict. She said, weapon low, voice lower. Alan smiled at me, not her. "Kiddo," he said, "you can fix this with a sentence." I realized then what he'd been angling at from the start. Not money, not mercy. My confession to the camera he'd hidden in his jacket. Me saying I left her so he could sell the memory to anyone who needed to believe it. "I didn't leave," I said. For the last time, not to him, but to myself. Klein moved like a man who has learned the timing of hurt. He took the bag, the camera, the performance. Alan sagged, not into remorse, but into inconvenience. Emmeline stepped from the shadows last, her face open and tired. "Dad," she said. He looked at her like a man who'd just remembered a name. "Em." "Stop," she said. And it was the first thing any of us had said all night that sounded like faith. They took him. The freeway kept singing. I leaned on the rail and let the cold bite through my jacket. My fingers smelled like wool and rain. Behind my eyes, the red scarf finally lay still. I didn't win. The story simply ran out of places to hide. Was that enough to live with? The city washed itself in a better rain. The bakery brought back the cardamom buns. The barista said, "Rough week?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "On the house," like a spell. Sophie sent 1,000-word text that could be footnoted with, "We try again." Eli asked if he could fix my window, and I said yes, and he did, and we both knew it wasn't about the glass. Klein called to say charges were filed, tampering for Marjorie, obstruction for Alan, endangerment hanging over their heads like a weather forecast you can't ignore. Emmeline moved into a room at the group home with a window that faced a tree. She taped a drawing to her wall of a red scarf that wasn't a weapon anymore. My mother started taking a class on boundaries and brought me a syllabus, like proof. June built a fort in my living room out of chairs and quilts and declared it a memory castle where only the true books were allowed. Inside, she whispered, "I didn't like hiding." And I whispered back, "Me neither." And she said, "Let's not." We shook on it, like people who know contracts are just paper unless you show up for them. On my first day back at work, skin looked like skin again, and I didn't erase as much. Kellen said the clients would notice. I said I hoped so. He didn't fire me. He told me to take longer lunches, and I learned to walk in the rain without thinking of exits. When the black SUVs idled at corners, I pretended they were taxicabs in a city where that still meant glamour. And for a minute, it worked. The last letter came with no return address, as always. Inside, a photo of Carkeek Park, moss on the north side of a tree, a child's hand pointing, a father's shadow long and crooked on the path. On the back, "Proud of you." I didn't throw it away. I put it in a box labeled true, not because he meant it, but because I meant the answer. I'm proud of me too. If memory is a trap,
I learned to spring it from the inside. Could I teach the people I love to do the same?
I walked the beach in a coat that made me look like a person who belonged to the weather. The air smelled like salt and wet driftwood, and a grill someone refused to give up on. The sky did that Seattle thing where it pretends sunset is a rumor you weren't invited to. I stood where the sand meets the road and thought about doors. My life is smaller now, in the ways that count, and bigger in the ones that matter. I don't check my mirror for black SUVs every block. I do check on June's homework app like a spy whose mission is spelling. I keep the red scarf in a drawer where things go that changed me without asking permission. I learned that memory is not a camera. It is a room where the furniture gets moved by people who love you, and by people who don't, and by you, most of all. When strangers ask what happened, I tell them there was a crash, and a girl, and a family that needed to learn what truth sounds like in the dark. I leave out the parts where I became a person I didn't recognize and then decided to keep her anyway. The tide snuck up and wet my shoes. I laughed out loud because I deserved a cliché. Somewhere up the hill, a train blew its long, mournful note, and it sounded less like warning and more like a song about making it home. Maybe memory isn't a trap at all. Maybe it's a map you redraw until the road takes you where you promised yourself you'd go. I didn't escape my past. I edited it until the truth showed through. And when the lights went out on that freeway, I learned the only way out of the dark was to remember myself forward.